Hello humans, it's just Martine, and today celebrities are going to be recommending me books. Celebrities are not actually going to say, Martine, you should read this book. I don't know enough people for that, okay? Look at my subscriber count. Look at it right now. Does it look like I would know movie stars? No? No, it doesn't. Instead, I'm going to be getting recommendations from some of my favorite actors and authors for books to read based on book recommendations they have made to the world at large. So I scoured different blogs and news pieces and even one author's Goodreads to see what some of their favorite books were. I technically picked 4 celebrities, but I have a total of, I think, 5 recommendations. So to see which celebrities recommended which books and if their picks were any good, let's jump into the first one. So obviously I had to let the author of my favorite graphic novels recommend me a graphic novel specifically for this. And it just so happened that I had recently checked it out from the library separately when I made the idea for this video and was looking for books for it. And so I was like, perfect. So for the first Alice Oseman book, the graphic novel one, I read Spinning by Tillie Walden. And I'm giving this 4 stars. So in terms of graphic novels, it was a great one. I've liked Tillie Walden's work before, so that was already a positive going into this. And this is her graphic memoir about growing up as a figure skater and a synchronized skater, as well as growing up with her identity and trying to come out. I definitely think I found the ice skating part the most interesting because I know like nothing about figure skating. It was interesting to see, like she mentioned in her author's note, the way that her life events impacted her skating and vice versa. The art was very good. I think she had to do this really hard task where she drew herself but growing up, and I feel like she did it so well that it was subtle changes to the point where like I realized over time that she was growing up, but by the end I was like, wait a second, and then I flipped to the earlier part in the book and I was like, oh my gosh, you can see how it's the same person, but she's just so much older now than when she started, because this travels like through 8 years of her life basically. So I really enjoyed this. I mean, I know Alice Oseman knows what they're talking about when it comes to graphic novels, so there was no doubt that at least I wouldn't dislike it, which is oftentimes where I sit with graphic novels, where largely I dislike graphic novels. And then sometimes there are ones that I enjoy, and luckily this was one that I enjoyed. So thanks, Alice, for the recommendation.
I actually think this one's going to be a little difficult for me to talk about because I'm very conflicted. Because I just read Let's Talk About Love, which I've been meaning to read for years, but the reason I read it for this video is because Alice Oseman has recommended it, which makes sense because Alice Oseman, as an ace author who also writes ace characters from time to time, this is a book with an ace main character. I feel like there was a good side to this book and there was a bad side to this book. The good side of this book was the representation, which I think is the main reason why Alice Oseman recommended it. I know that a lot of ace representation in media is aro ace representation, where a person is not just asexual, but also aromantic. As a person who is ace, but not aro, this is fine representation. I relate to some of it, but there are some really big gaps in the ways that I can relate to it. And so I've had trouble finding characters represented in media that really feel like me. So this representation was the perfect representation for me to read for a number of reasons. We have an ace but biromantic main character that we're following. She's navigating the dating world already knowing those identities in herself. And I think another thing about a lot of media with ace main characters is that they're discovering their identity through the process of the story. But in this story, our character already identifies that way, and we're seeing how that plays out in her life afterwards, basically, which I really appreciate. I think it's valuable to have media that can help you realize who you are, but I think it's also validating to have media to say, hey, I'm like you are, and these things happen to me too. I feel like there are different types of queer media specifically in that way. The part where you are learning to identify a certain way or discovering something, and then the part where we just see how that is part of your life. So I really appreciated that representation. There were lines in here that were a bit heavy-handed at times, maybe, potentially just because, like, I know those feelings though, that really clearly expressed some things that I felt before. The problem was the writing. This is, I guess it's a YA book. Technically our main character is 19 and she's in college, but it reads really young, which is fair because 19-year-olds are young. They're more grown up than 16-year-olds, but there are things that they're still working through. And we talk a lot in my developmental classes about the difference between like the legal factor of being a minor versus the overall concept of adolescence. And technically, mentally, adolescence lasts well into your 20s. So I feel like this was a young adult book because it was about a young adult going through similar problems. And I don't think it's new adult because of the way it was handled. It's so hard to differentiate these different things. The voice of the character felt really young, which is fine, but the writing quality was kind of impacted to the point where you were like, I'm not sure if this is supposed to be this way because it's the voice of the character or if it's just the writing, which made it hard. It made it read really quickly, but it just didn't feel fully developed. Same with the beats in the story. Like, the pacing was a little wacky for me, especially towards the like 75% and onwards mark. Like the end of the story, I had a lot of trouble with pacing wise. The beats just didn't land where I felt like they should. And because they didn't land where I felt like they should, they landed with less impact than they could have. That made this hard. So I gave this 3.5 stars. The 3.5 is basically for the representation. The points off are for some of the writing style and quality and the pacing. I still think this is a really valuable book, and that's why I don't want to discourage people from reading it, even though the writing was maybe not up to what I wanted it to be. But that's hard, because when you're recommending a book, like, you want to say, this is a really great book. And we often don't have the chance in those conversations to have a nuanced take of, this book does this really well, and that's what makes it valuable. Of course, there's always value inherent in art, but I think the point stands that like the thing that people should get from this is the representation. Let's read somebody else's recommendation for once.
Okay, so a couple months ago, Milo Manheim posted on his Instagram story about this book, The Creative Act, A Way of Being, by Rick Rubin. I keep thinking it's by like Nick Nubin. I keep messing up the first letters. Anyway, it's called The Creative Act. It's basically all about the creative process. The author is this big music producer who has lots of experience making art. Anyway, so Milo recommended this. He said it was an incredible book, and that post honestly like jump-started the idea for making this video, because before I had thought about this type of video, but I could only think of 2 celebrities whose book recommendations I would want to read. I felt like that wasn't enough. I could either make a vlog with the recommendations of one celebrity, multiple recommendations, or I could make one with multiple celebrities, each getting at least one recommendation. But I felt like making a video with just 2 celebrities and multiple recommendations from each was a little weird. It might not be, but I felt like it was weird. So as soon as I had a 3rd celebrity in the bag with this recommendation, I okayed the video. If you do not know Milo Manheim, I think he's honestly most famous for his time on Disney Channel. I found out about him when I watched season 2 of Doogie Kamealoha MD on Disney+. Then around the same time, he was in The Prom Pact on Disney+. I watched those 2 things with them together and I was like, this is an interesting dude. I started following him on social media. Then I finally broke down and watched the Zombies movies. They're Disney Channel original musical movies whose artistic content is like questionable, but I still found them to be enjoyable watches, like a breezy way to spend an afternoon, if you will. The point being, mainly a Disney Channel legend. His mom was on that ghost show. The one episode I watched of that show freaked me out. What is it called? It's not Ghostbusters. They can see ghosts? This is gonna drive me insane. Anyway, the point is, that's who Milo Manheim is. He recommended this book about making art. Since he's from an artistic family and obviously an actor himself, I was like, okay, if he thinks this is a good look at the creative process, I should read it. And I agree, 4 stars. What was interesting about reading this actually was that I didn't spend most of my time reading it thinking about the creative process as maybe you would think about it. Like, I wasn't thinking about my writing or making videos or acting or music or any of those things. I was really relating to the ideas in it and thinking of how the ideas could apply to me in my life in terms of my research. I know when I say I was thinking about my research, you are inclined to believe that research is not a creative thing. From my lived experience of doing research, I can say that a lot of research is a creative process. You have idea generation, you have follow through, you have ideas that come more easily than others. To me, doing research is an inherently creative process, and that's why I've fallen in love with doing research over the years, because at first I thought it would be really boring, but it's actually this great creative process. And so it was really interesting reading this right before the semester started and jumping back into my thesis and thinking about how it applied to me, how some of the things that hold us back in art are holding me back in my research. This book talked about how to get around some of those things and talked about the different stages. I just really loved that. I would say the first half of this book is better than the second half because the second half is a bit more disjointed, but in the first half we go through every step in the creative process. And I think that was really valuable. That's even when I noticed, oh, it's the same as research, and started to think about research in more of a creative act type of way, and to think of this book as applicable to my life as a student now and hopefully a full-time researcher, professor in the future. That was fascinating, and I do think it only drives home the point that creativity is a way of being, that there's something inherently creative about everything in human life, right? Like, humans in some ways are meant to create, and we put lots of labels on the types of creation, and a lot of people want to think that creativity is about art in the traditional sense, but creativity is about everything to me. Creativity is about problem solving. Creativity is about having nothing and making something. That does not just happen in traditional art forms. It happens in everything that humans do. I dare you to look at the world and find something that's not actually creative. Even monotonous tasks can be really creative when you think about it in a certain way. So anyway, I really enjoyed reading this book. It's hard to say whether I learned something from it or whether it spoke to things that I already know or whether it was assuring in validating my own experiences in life. I don't know. I think it was a mixture of that. I think I learned some new things, had some things validated, relearned some things. I think it was all there. It could have been 5 stars. In fact, I thought it was going to be until I reached the second half, and then again, it was kind of muddled. So overall, though, a really interesting read. So thanks to Milo for the recommendation.
This next book is just as famous, if not more famous, than the people recommending it, and that is The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. And I'm basing this recommendation off of 2 different celebrities, both of them white male celebrities, which we're not surprised about given the contents of the book. Nevertheless, it was recommended by Andrew Garfield and Austin Butler. Andrew Garfield has spoken highly of The Catcher in the Rye before, and then so has Austin Butler, and I'm sure many, many other male celebrities. And I can't pinpoint if it's because they just all had to read it in high school, and so it's like a book that they all know, or what. Regardless, I read it, and I'm giving it 3.5 stars. I think I have the weirdest review possible of this book, because I'm going to give you a comp title for this book that is going to feel weird. But you have to trust me, it is an accurate comp title. Comp title I have for The Catcher in the Rye is every Junie B. Jones book written by Barbara Park. This feels insane for a couple of reasons. One, this is like a pretentious classic, and Junie B. Jones is a book series about a kindergartner. No, I guess that's where the insanity ends. There was something about this writing style that just felt so much like an older Junie B. Jones to me. I can't tell if it was the stream of consciousness where the character just blatantly has like kind of terrible thoughts sometimes that are fully voiced to the audience, or if it was like something about the immaturity of the main character, or what. But there was something so distinctly Junie B. Jones about Holden Caulfield? Caulfield? I don't care. That, I think, was my favorite part of this book, because I was giggling the whole time, being like, this sounds like Junie B. Jones. The major stands of this book are rolling. Junie B. Jones is a comp title. That's insane. I love it. The Catcher in the Rye. What is this book about? It's this book about this young adult. He's a teenager, Holden. He's getting kicked out of yet another school, and we're following him a few days around Christmas time, which is timely, as he leaves that school that he was kicked out of, but before he tells his parents that he has been kicked out of school. So he's kind of just floating around New York City, not returning home yet. It's mainly just like what it's like living in his brain. The ending is so weird and ambiguous, and I know it's meant to be ambiguous, but it's like,
what? There were things that were so weird about this that Holden even like acknowledged were weird. Like, he described watching people cut their nails so many times in this book, and he was like, yeah, for some reason at that school we spent a lot of time watching people clip their nails. And I was like, this is unnecessary, unpleasant, just weird. I didn't hate Holden, which is interesting because a lot of people say that they do. But maybe because I was comparing him to Junie B. Jones, I did not hate him. I don't think it's a particular mark in his favor that I compared his thought process to that of a kindergartner. But to each their own. I also feel like this is an interesting one with regard to another celebrity, because there's this one review that's on like the cover of Solitaire by Alice Oseman that's like Catcher in the Rye for the digital age or whatever. And I'm like, is that because Tori is depressed? Because that's the only similarity, I guess. And honestly, not even a very good depiction of depression. Here, like, I didn't feel like he was depressed. He just kept saying he was. And maybe that was my, like, misreading of it. But he kept saying stuff was depressing. But I didn't feel like the emotion translated correctly. So anyway, 3.5 stars. It wasn't bad. And I read it quickly. And the writing was easy to follow, which is not something I can say of all or most classics. But, like, you know, whatever, really. Thanks for the recommendation, but meh. It's time to talk about Angels in America. I've been putting off filming this review because I just have like a lot about this play, just a lot. So I guess we'll start from the beginning. Why did I read it for this video? Technically, this is a joint recommendation because it's been recommended by Alice Oseman. It's one of their favorite books. It's a play, but yeah, books. And then it's kind of been recommended by Andrew Garfield because Andrew Garfield was in a version of these 2 plays. Technically, Angels in America, it's 2 plays. Because 1 play was not enough. So the first half is Millennium Approaches and the second half is Perestroika. My experience reading this was very complex. I feel like the last month or so of my life has just been like this story living in my brain, rent-free. I read it and then I watched the HBO miniseries, and I don't know, there's really something about it. I'm giving it 4.5 stars. The reason it doesn't get 5 stars is just because like there's just a little disconnect for me. One of the things that's really fascinating about this story is that there are parts that really don't make any sense to me. And usually that means that I dislike a story when I really don't get it. But this just left me thinking and asking so many questions that I think the lack of comprehension in some spaces was really valuable for me. Nevertheless, it meant maybe some messages that the author was trying to get across didn't fully land for me, hence the 4.5 stars. But I still really, really, really love this story. Okay, if you're not familiar, Angels in America, it's these 2 plays, and we're following a bunch of people, but the setting is New York City during the AIDS epidemic. I would say we're following like 4 main characters. The first main character, Lewis. How do I explain Lewis's role in this? In the beginning of the play, he's the boyfriend of this guy named Pryor Walter, and Pryor gets diagnosed with AIDS. At the same time, we're following this character, Joe, and he is a Mormon. In an unhappy marriage, his wife is like addicted to, I forget, is it Valium? It's something like that. She spends a lot of her time really disconnected from the world. And he's also trying to figure out who he is. And then the fourth like main person is technically a historical figure. Roy Cohn is a very famous lawyer with some pretty terrible views, but he's also diagnosed with AIDS, okay? So we're following these 4 and we're largely seeing where their stories intersect, which is fascinating and probably why the whole thing is like a 9-hour set of 2 plays instead of something shorter than that. There's just a lot that the playwright was trying to unpack. So we're following those stories, and one thing that's interesting is there's a lot of like magic involved in it. There's this weird angel. There's lots of like visions involved, some that allow some of the characters to talk to one another. But I think for me, at the time that I was reading this, it was largely a story about suffering and isolation and living in spite of those things. I think I read it at just the right time.
I was dealing with a lot of things mentally, physically, and although there were lots of people from afar that were supporting me, I still felt really isolated and alone where I was. This story, I think, says, suffering is real, suffering happens, we continue anyway. At the time that I read it, it was very healing. And watching the HBO miniseries was also incredible. I don't know, it just makes me think so much. I don't think this is a show for everyone, right? Like, it's weird. I was worried that it wouldn't be for me. I wanted to like it very badly, and I wasn't sure that I would. And even as I was reading it, there were times I was like, what? But I think it has stuck with me in a really powerful way. Again, just like really nestled into my brain. This was a thinky one. I'm using this partially as a recommendation from Andrew Garfield, and I just have to say, like, watching scenes from Andrew Garfield's version, like the production that he was in, was very helpful for me, because I have a great weakness when it comes to reading plays, which is where, like, I don't have any creativity or imagination when reading plays at all. It'll just be like words, and I won't understand the subtext that could be there. And when you watch Andrew Garfield's performance, through his delivery, he hands you that subtext. And so I feel like I would have gotten a lot less from this if I hadn't seen clips from his performance, because I really feel like his performance gave me the tool to unlock some of this text. And I wish I could see the whole production that he was in. It's on a streaming service that I can't access, so maybe one day. I don't know, that was really valuable for me and helpful, because again, like, I rarely rate plays well because I just read them kind of flatly. Reading plays is not a skill that I have, so I really need somebody to show me. And I would also say, like, that was true in the miniseries too with other characters. Like, I got so much more from Roy Cohn watching the miniseries where Al Pacino played him. His performance was incredible. I got more from him than I did necessarily from reading it. And so I think it's really important to remember when you're reading a play to seek out performances and see how other people have interpreted it, especially if you're, like me, bad at interpreting it, or you read in a way that you're like rushing to the end, which I know is a bad habit of mine. Seeing somebody else perform it and force you to slow down and enjoy it at the pace like it's supposed to go is really helpful. And I think that made all the difference. I think if I had read this without seeing any clips from the show, I would have had a vastly different experience. That's all I'll say about that. How you read things matters, and other people can help frame how you read things. Angels in America. I loved it. It's going to live in my brain probably forever now, so more life.
Even though in chronological order it did not make much sense to include Angels in America as my last read for this, I just wanted to take a moment to honor it and how much of an impact it has had on my life through the second half of this year. Even right now, as I'm recording to you, over the past several days, before I got around to editing this video, I was thinking about more life and the messages in this book and just appreciating it for how it has helped me this year and continues to help me. I'm sorry to tell the other contestants that Angels in America is my favorite recommendation from this video. So Alice Oseman and Andrew Garfield both have incredible taste. I still enjoyed all the books that I read. There wasn't one that I hated. So good work to everyone. I'm going to end this vlog here. If you liked it, go ahead and give it a big thumbs up and comment down below. Have you ever read a book that was recommended by a specific celebrity? And what did you think of their recommendation? And subscribe for more bookish and college lifestyle content. And until next time, bye humans, bye!